Ms. Porter of California next.
Thank you so much. Republicans have told us today that China poses an existential threat to the United States. Their solution to that is to spend and spend and spend on fancy weapon systems, often built in their districts, that they hope will deter conflict. So now we have aircraft carriers, fighter jets, and tanks to fight a war, designed to fight a war that may never happen. But when Congress does that, what they are not doing is using our taxpayer dollars to address the problems that the Chinese Communist Party is actually causing. China is fighting every day to break international law and to expand its reach. Mr. Mattis, could you briefly describe China's claims in the South China Sea?
They have an expansive claim called the 9-dash line that stretches well beyond any recognizable feature and under the UN Convention and the Law of the Sea of what would be recognizable territory.
So do you believe this is an illegal claim?
Whether or not I believe it's illegal is irrelevant because there's an international court that has decided that some of those claims are illegal.
Okay, so I want to make that clear. China has taken an expansive, unlawful territorial claim to the South China Sea, and they've ignored international law. This is a very, very clear and important example of China not playing by the rules, not following international law. And that behavior is causing real harm in people's lives, whether that's in the Philippines or in Vietnam. Mr. Mattis, can you briefly describe for us illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing?
Well, it's exactly what you described it, but China, the PRC has a particular role in this given that their deep sea fishing fleet is far larger than any of the other countries. And because it is illegal and unreported and unregulated, it is also a nexus for forced labor, and those ships have been sort of violating the borders and exclusive economic zones of other countries, including in the Western Hemisphere. So I'm not quite sure how far you want to go, but there's quite a bit.
That's perfect. So what we have is Chinese fishing fleets. They're using their fishing fleets to expand their territorial claims, their international power, to exert power over other countries. When they do this in Vietnam, they are attempting to essentially roll over Vietnam. They're just another country in the CCP's mind that is standing in their way of achieving absolutist power over regional and global commerce. So China's trying to bulldoze over Vietnam, including by stealing its fish, and they have largely depleted Vietnam's fisheries. What are the consequences to Vietnam?
There's obviously the loss of economic revenue. There is the sort of impoverishment of local fishers.
How does that help China?
Well, one, most seafood is processed in the PRC, and therefore it sort of makes Vietnam and other countries dependent upon that processed food.
Yeah, so I mean, look, China's ruthlessly expanding its power, breaking the rule of law, and the Chinese Communist Party calls this seeking strategic advantage, in part through what they refer to as the three warfares. General Spalding, what are some of the risks of China being successful in breaking international law without consequence?
I think it emboldens everybody else to do the same thing, and I think that's the challenge here. We've seen a complete breakdown in the liberal democratic order as a result.
So, Mr. Mathis, does Vietnam have the military capacity to secure its exclusive economic zone from Chinese incursions?
No.
So Vietnam can't effectively safeguard its own resources. China's taking advantage of that, and China and the Communist Party are hurting people and breaking international law to become more powerful and ultimately to expand their power in a way that will threaten U.S. interests in the long term. So what is the United States doing about this? Mr. Mathis, which U.S. agency protects global fisheries? Do you know?
I believe it's a combination of the Coast Guard and NOAA, and as I recall, there was an initiative that was run by the NSC that was at the end of the Trump administration and carried through in the early Biden administration to take action on IUU fishing.
So it's the Coast Guard. Do you know how many cutters the Coast Guard has in the Western Pacific?
I'm going to guess somewhere between 0 and 2.
Yeah, 5. 5 cutters to protect roughly 40 million square miles. So look, in Washington, we have a gadget problem. Everyone wants the fanciest weapon systems, but to combat illegal fishing, to combat the influence of the CCP, all you don't need stealth bombers, you don't need an aircraft carrier, you need is a relatively inexpensive Coast Guard cutter and funding for good coasties who want to serve their country. That's the tools that we ought to be deploying today to counter Chinese influence. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the extra time, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair